Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're venturing into a really fascinating, maybe even surprising area. This growing thing called cybersex among young
Mhm.
people. This actually came from one of our listeners shared an audio source. It's a discussion from the Vietnamese podcast Thum Thi.
Right.
Now, the term itself, cybersex, it might make you pause, right? Like, is this really a big deal? Is it actually shaping how young adults, experience intimacy?
It's a fair question.
And that's exactly what we want to dig into today. We want to understand what it is, why it seems to be gaining traction, and, well, what it all means for young people now.
And it really sits at this crossroads, doesn't it? You've got personal connection, technology moving so fast, and social norms shifting all at once. It's definitely something worth exploring carefully.
Absolutely. So our source, it's this really lively chat in Vietnamese. You've got Ton Phuong and Hung Boi, the hosts of Thum Thi, and they're talking with Let Ta Han, who's a clinical psychologist.
Gives us a great window, doesn't it? Unfiltered perspectives.
Totally. And what's interesting is right off the bat, Han Busi seems a bit surprised that Yu Kwa Mang, which, translates roughly to love through the network, isn't just about long-distance relationships.
Right, she thought it was broader.
Yeah, she mentions dating apps, stuff she knows, but the hosts are like, no, we're talking specifically about sexual activity that happens digitally. So even for someone who's like totally online, this specific focus was maybe a bit new.
And look, as we get into this, it's just important to remember we are talking about really personal, intimate stuff.
Yeah.
So, we need to approach it thoughtfully.
Couldn't agree more. So the Tumti hosts, they use this term cybersh just temporarily for Yu Kwamang, and it immediately makes you wonder, okay, how is this different from just, chatting online or video calls like we used to think about?
Yeah, what's the specific angle here?
And maybe the bigger question is, why would young people choose this, sometimes even over seeing someone in person, even if they live nearby?
Yeah.
It kind of challenges our usual ideas about intimacy.
And what's really striking is how much more popular it seems to have become just in the last, say, 5 years or so. I mean, the internet's been around much longer.
Right.
So what's behind this recent boom? That's a key piece of the puzzle we need to look at.
Okay, so let's really try to nail this down. When we say cybersex, what exactly does that cover?
Well, it might feel super modern, like a Gen Z thing,
Mm-hmm.
but the actual term cybersex, it's been around a bit longer than you might think, maybe about a decade before Gen Z really hit their stride.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Broadly speaking, it just means any kind of recreational or, well, sexual activity that uses social media or the internet to happen.
Right.
So the idea isn't brand new, even if the ways it plays out feel very current.
Gotcha. And the source material, it seems to break it down into two main types that are common now. Sexting,
Like the chat-based stuff.
exactly, sexual chat, and then VHX, which is sending suggestive photos or videos. That helps clarify the specific actions, right?
It does. And Hanbusi's take on sexting is, well, pretty eye-opening. She talks about it like it's pretty normal, almost a casual way to flirt.
Casual, even if you don't know the person well.
Apparently, yeah. She suggests it's not always tied to being miles apart or having some deep emotional thing going on. It can happen just as you're getting to know someone.
Mm.
Seems like a different way to test the waters, maybe? Explore that initial interest.
Wow, okay. Like a low-stakes entry point almost.
Yeah.
And then FIXX, sending pictures and videos, that definitely ups the ante.
For sure.
Han even mentions this practice, apparently among some female friends, of having like collections of these photos or short videos ready to send as a signal if they're interested in someone.
That's quite a direct digital signal, isn't it? Very specific to how this generation communicates, perhaps.
It seems so. But immediately you think about the risk, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The big question, what happens if those images, those videos, get shared further? That whole issue of digital permanence, losing control,
Yeah.
it's huge.
Exactly. And Han actually addresses that. She mentions that, a common way people try to handle that risk is by being really careful with camera angle or hiding faces, anything that could easily identify them.
So there's an awareness there, an attempt to manage the downside, even while engaging in the activity.
Yeah, it suggests they know the risks, at least some of them, and are trying to navigate that within the digital space itself.
So let's dig a bit deeper into the why. Why is this trend growing now?
Right.
Fundamentally, you have to link it to the internet itself, its development, how widespread it is, and specifically, social media, video chat apps. They've just created completely new ways for people to express themselves sexually, ways that just didn't exist before.
Makes total sense. The tools are everywhere, constantly changing, becoming part of everyday life. But it's not just the tech, is it? The source also talks about changing attitudes.
Oh, absolutely. Social attitudes towards youth sexuality, they've shifted. Maybe not everywhere, but in many places. And that combination, the tech being available and maybe a bit more openness socially, that's likely fueled this recent surge in cybersex. Digital platforms offer this, well, relatively anonymous, accessible space for exploring things.
Han Bushi gives a really good personal angle on this. She calls herself a digital native.
Meaning she grew up with this stuff, right? Internet's just there.
Exactly. It's the primary way she communicates, gets info, socializes. So for her generation, maybe integrating digital stuff into all parts of life, including sex, just feels, well, natural, almost expected.
And when she says about enjoying expressing her attractiveness online through flirting,
Yeah.
that's interesting. She frames it not just as like looking for validation, but as self-discovery, figuring out her own desires.
Yeah, exploring who she is. Then the conversation in the source shifts a bit to video sex. Sounds like it's more intimate.
Apparently so, yeah. Usually happens in closer relationships is the implication. And the point they make is trust becomes even more vital there.
Because it's more raw, unedited.
Exactly. More revealing. It's a much bigger step in terms of vulnerability compared to just text or even sending a carefully chosen photo.
And Han tells this story, kind of funny but also awkward, about some explicit content accidentally getting shared publicly.
Oof. Yeah. That's a stark reminder of how easily things can go wrong online, right? Even if it starts casual, once it's out there, control is limited.
Hearing Lon talk, you definitely get the sense that cybersex has a real appeal for a lot of young people. There's enthusiasm there.
There is. But then the psychologist, Lei Han, brings in this crucial other side. He mentions hearing from people who've had negative experiences like getting unsolicited explicit pictures right out of the blue as a way someone tries to start contact.
Ugh, yeah. That immediately raises flags about, well, what's okay culturally,
Yeah.
and just basic boundaries being violated online.
And that difference between cybersex that's wanted and consensual versus digital exposure that's unwanted, it's critical. One person might find it empowering, another finds it intrusive, disrespectful, maybe even harassment. It just hammers home how vital consent is no matter how you're interacting.
The expert in the source also brought up this idea of authenticity online and how cybersex might let people, engage sexually with maybe multiple partners without the physical risks, pregnancy, STIs.
Framing it as potentially safer in that sense, that's definitely part of the appeal for some.
And Han kind of backs this up, talking about safety not just physically but emotionally too. She gives this example of a friend, raised maybe more traditionally, who used online interactions to explore her sexuality first before she felt ready for physical intimacy in her committed relationship. It let her sort of navigate potential moral dilemmas or avoid physical risks with someone she didn't fully trust yet.
So it can function almost like a hidden shelter, a private space to explore curiosity and desire on your own terms, feeling safe and in control.
That's a really strong motivator, especially if you're dealing with societal or family pressures around sex.
But, and this is a big but, we absolutely have to talk about the real dangers. The risk is not hypothetical.
Right. Like what specifically?
Well, for one, AI-generated images, manipulated photos, that technology is getting scarily good. And then the huge issue of revenge porn, or just non-consensual sharing of intimate content. The source mentions real cases, people finding out their private cybersex stuff has been leaked online. The consequences can be devastating.
And Han mentions this too, right? The trust issue. The person you're interacting with, they might not be who they say they are.
Exactly. They could be using someone else's pictures or AI stuff. Verifying identity online is incredibly hard. That's a massive barrier to feeling truly safe.
And if you do share something intimate,
the potential for it to spread without your consent is terrifyingly real. And because it's digital, getting it back, erasing it, often impossible. The damage can be long-lasting.
This all leads to a really big question, I think. Can these online sexual experiences actually provide the same kind of emotional fulfillment as, direct face-to-face encounters?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And honestly, the answer is probably really varied. It depends so much on the individual, their needs, what the online interaction is actually like.
Well, Han's perspective seems to be that, for her, it does fulfill certain needs, like self-expression, exploring desires. She even talks about finding a sense of connection, almost a community, online with others, exploring similar things.
So it's not just the physical simulation, it's a shared experience, a feeling of being understood, perhaps.
Yeah. And she argues it can be a way to engage with those desires when maybe physical intimacy isn't an option or isn't wanted or doesn't feel safe yet, like a bridge or an alternative.
Makes sense?
She even shares, quite personally, about enjoying cyber sex with her boyfriend when they were apart. She describes feeling a real sense of shared experience, even, climaxing together online. And what really struck me was she said the memory, the emotional weight of those online times felt comparable to when they were physically together later. That suggests a really deep level of engagement, emotionally and mentally.
From a psychological angle, we can definitely see links. There are elements of voyeurism, perhaps getting aroused by seeing things. And neurologically, it's interesting. You've got the limbic system, the emotional part of the brain, working with the prefrontal cortex, the logic part.
So your brain is actively kind of thinking its way into arousal, not just reacting instinctively.
In a way, yeah. You're using imagination, responding to what you see and hear, maybe interpreting texts. Logical processes enhance the arousal. And importantly, those feel-good neurochemicals, oxytocin, serotonin, dopamine, they can be released during these online interactions, much like during physical intimacy.
Huh.
And the expert in the source made a fascinating point. Sometimes arousal in cybersex might last longer than during physical sex, where orgasm can feel like an endpoint. That extended arousal, that could be a big part of why it's appealing, why it's become such a trend.
That's a really interesting biological or neurological take on it. The source expert also pointed out this kind of contradiction, didn't they? Like, people are afraid of being exposed online,
Right, the fear is real.
but they still want to do it. It sounds like a complex mix of feelings.
It really does. It suggests that maybe for some, the risk itself or the feeling of doing something a bit taboo might actually make it more exciting. A little bit of thrill attached to pushing boundaries, even online.
Makes you think of that old saying, tell someone not to do something.
And that's the first thing they'll do. Exactly. Could we be seeing a sort of generational shift in how curiosity works or what feels stimulating? Gen Z grew up so connected, maybe their baseline is different.
That's a fascinating thought.
Well, the expert in the source floated a possible link. Gen Z seems generally more comfortable with public displays of affection, even online ones. Maybe cybersex feels like a natural next step, an extension of their digital lives, and maybe a place that feels safer somehow to be their true selves and explore sex without the immediate pressures of physical encounters.
Hanbushi brought up another angle, too, that maybe, for some, cybersex is a way to kind of avoid the responsibilities that come with a physical relationship.
That's a really interesting point. And you can connect that to broader trends, maybe, in how young people see things like marriage, long-term commitment. Sometimes those views are shaped by, what they saw growing up, their family background, feelings of emotional security or insecurity.
So if maybe home life didn't feel super secure, they might be hesitant about deep commitment later on.
It's possible that's a factor for some, yes. Or you could frame it less as avoidance and more as delayed adulthood, or just being more cautious about commitment, maybe seeking connections that feel less binding until they feel more ready, more mature.
Right. But Han pushes back on that a bit, doesn't she? She says it's not necessarily about avoiding commitment altogether.
Yeah, her point seems to be more about being selective, careful about who you commit to.
So cybersex could be a way to, get needs met, explore desires while you're still figuring out the tricky parts of dating in person. Maybe avoiding bad experiences you've had before.
Exactly. It could feel less risky, maybe more controlled, especially in those early stages of getting to know someone.
Yeah.
So really, when you look at Gen Z and cybersex, the motivations seem pretty diverse. It's very personal. There's no single answer to why.
Okay, so given all that complexity, if a young person does choose to engage in cybersex, what's the core advice from the expert in the source? How can they stay safer?
The number one thing emphasized is communication. Talking openly, connecting, really discussing boundaries and safety up front. Look, sex is normal, but doing it online, that needs clear rules between the people involved for safety, privacy, and making sure everyone's okay with it.
That communication and consent piece feels fundamental, doesn't it? Online or offline.
Absolutely critical. And building real trust before getting into it, that's huge because the risk of stuff getting shared is just so high. Also, digital literacy. Young people really need to understand how this stuff works.
Like privacy settings,
Yeah.
screenshots.
Exactly. Privacy settings. The fact that things can be screen recorded, that digital data often sticks around forever. Being smart about the tech is key. And the expert really stresses there's just no guarantee of privacy online. That's the hard truth.
That's a sobering but important reminder for everyone, really.
And Hanbusi adds her own perspective, which I think is valuable. She basically says, hey, Don't forget that direct physical intimacy is also really good.
Yeah, don't let the online stuff completely take over.
Right. She encourages people who do cybersex not to only do that. Explore physical intimacy, too, when it feels right, at your own pace.
So find a balance, maybe. Don't let digital become the only way you connect intimately.
Precisely. Han seems to believe they can coexist, online and offline intimacy, and maybe even make a relationship richer. And she gives a very practical tip for online safety.
Yeah.
Take your time.
How much time?
She suggests maybe 3 weeks, maybe more. Really get to know someone, build some trust. Before you even talk about or share explicit stuff, don't just jump into it with someone new online. That's just basic self-protection.
That sounds like really solid, practical advice. You know, listening back to our discussion, I think it really highlights what we set out to do, not to judge cybersex, not to say it's good or bad, but just to try and understand it, see it from the perspective of young people living it now, rather than just applying old rules without really getting it.
Exactly. It's about acknowledging how intimacy and sex are changing in our very digital world.
And just hammering home again. Safety and consent are non-negotiable, always, in any kind of sexual activity, online included. You know, sexual expression, it's part of being human throughout life. Navigating it safely and respectfully, that's always the goal.
Couldn't agree more.
Han Bui also had that great final point. Remember, there's a real person on the other side of the screen.
With feelings?
Yeah, with feelings and with the power to share or misuse what you give them. We can't forget that human element in digital spaces.
Responsibility, understanding. They're crucial.
So yeah, we just really urge young people, think about responsibility, understand the risks, put safety measures in place if you engage in this.
Ultimately, safety, physical safety, psychological safety, that has to be number one when you're exploring any kind of sexual activity.
Thank you so much. Your insights, the scientific context, it's been incredibly helpful in unpacking this, really illuminating.
It's been a really interesting discussion to have.
And thanks, as always, to you for listening, for sharing the source material that sparked this, and for joining us on this deep dive into, well, a really relevant topic today.
Yes, thank you.
And just one final thought to leave you with. Technology is evolving so incredibly fast. Social norms keep shifting. How do you think our ideas about intimacy, our experiences of it, might continue to change in the future?
Yeah.
What are the long-term effects of more and more digitally based sexual experiences might be on our relationships, even on how we see ourselves? Definitely something to think about.